Thank you for joining us today. The webinar will be roughly 25 minutes with Q&A as time allows. As a quick reminder, we'll be sending the recording via email and we'll make all materials available on our website, which is www.bwcyberservices.com. So to set the stage for the webinar today, we know that the transition to remote operations means that now, more than ever, criminals are targeting access to your remote user's email with the intent to conduct fraudulent wire transfers. Our panelists are going to talk about how to minimize your risk to exposure. So I'll start by providing a brief intro to the panelists, beginning with Michael Bryce. He's the founder of BW Cyber Services, and he's a former Marine Corps officer who served in the 1st Gulf War and was trained by the National Security Agency in information warfare and cybersecurity. He founded BW in 2015 to deliver customized cybersecurity and related digital forensic investigations to regulated and non-regulated entities in the financial services industry. Based on his unique investigative work, he now collaborates closely with law enforcement as well as supports expert witness testimony. He's joined today by Beth Cronenwith, a consultant at Tri-State Capital Bank. Beth is a speaker and thought leader on topics such as risk management, treasury management, and strategic management. Finally, we're joined by Anthony Masha. Anthony is the managing partner of Essential Fund Services International. He's a former trader who now oversees EFSI's business development and marketing. So let's get started, and I will turn things over to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This is the 4th in a series that we've been focusing on since Corona hit to help our clients and others understand the increased risks related to the rush to remote operations. Based on that, we'd like to use this opportunity to educate you all on what risks you can expect and specifically related to how you can mitigate risks associated with wire transfers. Next slide, please. So if you're on this webinar and you're thinking, well, how will this affect me? Or perhaps we have good controls in place. Before you go, I'd like you to think about the fact that most of you are going to have critical third parties and others who may provide and cause you to inherit risks that you may not even be aware of. And this risk can go well beyond the financial potential we're going to talk about today to address legal risks, reputational risks, and regulatory risks. And we'll briefly speak to why that can be. But the idea here is understanding that. We want to talk to you about payment frauds, as well as your reliance or potential trusting of trusted third parties. And then we're going to briefly talk about ransomware, just because it comes into play as one of the new tools that, I should say, one of the older tools that criminals are using in new ways to monetize their access to your system if they can't do wire fraud. So why is the cyber guy talking about this? Well, it shouldn't just be the cyber guy talking about this, and that's why we have Beth and Anthony here today. Beth's with the bank, and she sees what's going on with payment frauds on the other side of the transaction. We see this from a forensic perspective, but whether the bank has anything to do with it or not, they always have something to do with the financial transaction. And then, of course, we've got Anthony here, who is the ultimate critical third party. He literally is in the middle of all of these activities and sees firsthand on both sides what's happening. So real quick, I'd like to turn it over to Beth, and Beth, let you just give a little purpose of the call today from the bank's perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, as you can see from what Michael has said already, the payments fraud landscape is one that we pay special attention to, and it's ever evolving. And the most important thing, I think, from a bank perspective is the education of all the participants in the payment space so that they can protect themselves from the evolution of payments fraud as the fraudsters get smarter and more clever every day. And as Michael touched on the reliance on trusted third parties, I think what we want to make you aware of is that you have third parties that you deal with, so does the bank, and it's good to have the trust in your third parties, but it's also good to have trust but verify relationships. Not that there's anything intentional in most of those relationships, but sometimes they could be more educated as well. So as we walk through this presentation today, keep in mind that education on all sides is one of the most important things that you can do to protect yourself from from payment fraud. And Anthony, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you, Beth. What I really want to add here is obviously we're on the front line, so we see this. Our employees deal with fund managers, clients, and their clients. So there are multiple targets here in potentially having a fraudulent activity happen. Communication is probably the biggest help that you can actually provide to the bank, to your client, to your client's client. So constantly always be communicating. If that means, and sometimes it could be a pain, but if that means picking up the phone 1 or 2 extra times, that probably makes the most sense, because it'll save you obviously in the long run. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when something like this may come in front of you, and you just want to be able to catch it before it happens. So with that being said, I'd like to kind of pass the baton back to Michael to continue on.
Thank you, Anthony. Next slide, please. So let's just go back to the basics. I am still a private pilot, and one of the first things I learned was that most accidents start on the ground, and they usually start with, do you think we should go fly? The second is that in the air, most accidents have more than one cause. And what we want to relay today is that most frauds are going to be multiple breakdowns and controls. So the reason why we've actually listed the IT team, or cyber, so to speak, and the operations team, or the bank, so to speak, is to show the nexus of those activities. And ultimately, it all comes down to the simple control lapses. Pareto analysis. 80% of the solution only takes 20% of the effort. So we're going to talk today about some easy fixes, how they're not costly, but also how you need to trust and verify, understanding that your trusted third parties may be your most critical link, and then understand voice confirmation. Lastly, authentication of trusted and authorized individuals is also important. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide and turn it over to Beth.
Thank you. Yeah, talking about the basics, I mean, it really does come down to that. There are so many things that can be avoided if everybody is vigilant in the process, and everybody knows what they need to do as far as looking out for fraudulent scenarios, and what they need to do if they encounter a fraudulent scenario. Email and network breaches, we've seen time and time again, are, as it says here, the secret sauce for successful frauds. In fact, the AFP just did a survey and found that business email compromise in the financial services space is the most seen fraudulent mechanism for affecting payment fraud. So it's important to verify everything that you do. And I talked a little about trusted third parties before. Make sure your situation is nailed down, that you're verifying your processes, but that you also are talking with your partners and making sure that they exercise good security as well. It's important for all sides to do that, and if you do that, it's harder for the bad actors to have an impact on your environment. And as Anthony mentioned before, that communication is key too, as far as making sure that if you do suspect any fraud, you notify your partners as quickly as possible. Notify the bank, notify any third parties that you're dealing with as soon as possible, to make sure that everybody is reacting in a short timeline. Anthony, did you have anything to add to that conversation?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Beth. So, when we all rushed because of this COVID, this COVID rush to a remote work place, we were fortunate because we were ahead of the curve. We were kind of worried about cyber attacks, so we actually had purchased company issue laptops. And what I hate to see is that there are employees at home using a home computer in their home environment, which makes it even more difficult for your IT group to monitor. So I would just reiterate and make sure that you as a firm, make sure that your employees are separating business and pleasure. Because what if you have a child at home now that we're all working from home? Go onto your work laptop and click something by accident, and that obviously happens, and that could be really detrimental to the bad guys getting into your infrastructure. So with that, I'd like to continue to pass it on to Michael for the next slide.
Sure. Thanks, guys. So I'm a big believer on not talking conceptually, but talking specifically. So let's just talk about what the threat is, and let's draw the string between the bank and the cyber team. Next slide, please. What we'd like to do here is just very briefly at a high level explain to you an example of how I'll call it a standard phishing attack takes place and how it exploits a wire. And then we'll talk about some specific cases. One of the things that we will get into so you understand this could apply to anybody. This is not just your organization. This could be an organization that you're doing business with, and because of it, you are thinking you're covered and you're not. So let's just read from the left to the right. On the attack, I assume everybody on the call knows what a phishing email is, but if not, it's an email that comes through purporting to be something it's not. The ones that are really proving to be effective today, 9 out of 10 of the forensic investigations we're doing relate to an email that looks like somebody you trust is sending you an encrypted file, and you need to log in to the Microsoft portal. Now, it could be a Google portal, it could be AWS, it could be something else. But the point here is these portals actually exist, and this is actually how they transfer secure files, except it's not a secure file, it's a phish. And what they're doing, and the prize here, is they're stealing your credentials or your employees' credentials. And boy, let me tell you, as you move to the right, that becomes the holy grail. Whether they do something with it immediately, which most do not, or if they sit there and sometimes up to 6 to 9 months on average are reading every email going in and out of this employee's account. And ultimately, if that employee has anything to do with a wire transfer, or even more nefariously, if they're on CC with somebody else dealing with a transfer, that attacker has now gotten inside information on what to say, how to do it, how to affect a fraud. And we'll talk about a couple of examples in just a second that we've been through personally that tend to show how easy this is. And again, keep in mind, the reason why we're showing this is it's not just IT, it's not just operational controls, it's the nexus between those two. So let's go to the next slide. And Beth, why don't you talk about an email, a compromise that would relate to an attack and a financial fraud?
Sure. And this is one that sadly I think we've seen a lot of in the past couple years, and this plays to that AFP survey that I talked about too. This is how it happens. Somebody will get a wire request. Somebody in the treasury management group or the payments group at a firm will get an email that looks like it's coming from the CEO or CFO saying, "Hey, I'm out of the office. This wire needs to go out today. Here's the account information. Please send this wire." And the employee will think the request is coming from the company executive, will initiate the wire transfer to the account that was given, and then to find out that the money is going to the account of the perpetrator. And since it's a wire transfer, for the most part, it's irrevocable. So that's cash out the door. Now, the important thing that you need to remember is that the bank can go, if made known within the first day or so, the bank can go to the beneficiary bank of the wire and try to get the funds back. But if that perpetrator has already taken the funds out of the account and closed the account, then the chances are diminished as far as recovery of those funds. But on a best case basis, the funds will be recovered, but in theory, wires are irrevocable and they can be very, very difficult to get back once they've been initiated. So that's where it becomes critical that all the parties receive the proper authentication, authorization from who they're taking the instructions from, and the account that the funds are going to before they initiate any wire transfers. So I learned a new term today, TypoSquat, that Michael taught me. And Michael, do you want to talk about what TypoSquatting is?
Yeah, it's one of the things that's keeping us in business. I hate to say, TypoSquatting is when someone creates a domain that's one letter off from someone you believe and trust, and it looks just like it, and they may have broken into your email or that other company's email or somebody else's, but they're using this domain to communicate with you, and you think you're communicating with the other party. It's very effective. It's the primary way, along with breaking into valid accounts, that people are affecting these wires. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk about an actual real-world investigation we did. And this is one that is happening almost every day, by the way. So in this instance, BEC, by the way, is business email compromise. We talked about a TypoSquat. This combined both an email compromise and a TypoSquat activity. And as you read from the left to the right here, our client was a PE company, and they had a credit facility that they worked with, white glove service. So they had their holding companies work through that credit facility. Interestingly enough, as I mentioned before, the PE company now was on CC for all of the interactions between their holding companies, over 20 companies in that credit facility. Somebody broke into the email and was able to see every communication between all holding companies and the credit facility. Holy grail there already. So that's taken place on the left there, and there was one holding company that was going to do an early payout. The deception here came when the holding company purportedly, it was invalid, it was malicious, sent an email to the credit facility saying, we've decided not to pay, which was not the case. And then the holding company received, even though they thought, that they didn't know that went out, then they received an email from the credit facility, which was a TypoSquatted email and fake, giving them instructions on how to make the payment with wiring instructions. Now the twist. The holding company sent the wire, assumed they had made the payment, and did not know for 2 months that they had lost $1 million. And interestingly enough, what we found, and we found this with all of these wires don't go to China or Hong Kong or other places overseas anymore. That's too much of a tell. They bounce twice in the U.S. before they go overseas. So in this instance, went to one U.S. bank and then to another U.S. bank and then overseas. So when we got involved, we got the FBI involved. We could follow the trail, but we could not get the money. Next slide. So it can happen to anybody. That is wire fraud. So can ransomware. And we're on a webinar talking about wire fraud. Why do we throw ransomware up here? Well, the fact is, if a criminal can't monetize their breach into your system to affect a wire fraud or somehow trick your organization to monetize their access, they may revert back to ransomware, which is basically locking up your system and then charging you a ransom, usually in Bitcoin, to unlock it. This was very effective a couple of years ago. It went out of vogue. Now it's back because they're new and better tools, supposedly. So if you can switch to the next slide, please. I'd like to just go over in the news from last week. If you all remember the Panama Papers, 2016, April 2016, they were breached. Exceptional reputational issue, and a lot of bad things happened from that breach. You'd think law firms would have learned their lesson. I suspect the Allen Grubman law firm is having a bad week and has not learned that lesson because they were hacked, breached. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm pretty sure it probably started with a phishing email, and all of their data has been locked up. The ransom started at 21 million and is now at 42 million. This is quintessential what can happen to a trusted third party. And if you've not done enough due diligence to ensure your third party is protecting your data to a level that you expect, this could happen to anybody. Next slide, Beth. Beth, next slide.
Thank you. Yeah, we talked about trusted third parties, and Michael just gave an example of one that that did not perhaps act as they should. And it says here, trusted third parties should not be trusted. That doesn't mean they're not good business partners, but as I said before, all parties need to make sure that they're being vigilant and know what the process is, have well-documented procedures, education, so that they are not sucked into this vortex of fraud, even though they're acting in the best interest of their partners. So if you're dealing with attorneys or accountants, or if you outsource any of your internal staff, or any vendors with access to your data, as it says there, your payroll processor is a great example. Make sure that they are following the same rules of care that you are following and that the bank is following to avoid any type of fraud occurring in that situation. If we can go to the next slide, please. Michael, I think you want to take this?
So yeah, let's go on. So what do you do? At the end of the day, next slide, please. At the end of the day, we wanted to talk about the threat, wanted to make sure you understood that because of this rush, as Anthony kind of outlined it, this rush to remote operations, we've seen a lot of IT departments with good intentions make all sorts of exceptions to get their teams to work from home. And this has resulted in multiple vulnerabilities. Based on that, and I think that you hit it really well there, we're seeing it's not just your organization, and it's anybody you're dealing with. So the idea here is to be vigilant on your third parties and take precautions to have them verify that they have the same level of security and control hygiene that you do. Beth, any additional thoughts you'd like to add to third-party verification?
No, I think we take some extra steps at the bank if you're dealing with third parties like payroll processors to help you with that, to make sure that they are following the right, that they're following the right rules in the payment systems, that they are gathering the right due diligence on their customers, and we gather due diligence on them and on our customers. So if all the parties are working together, then you're really making yourself better as far as putting up the barriers against potential fraud. Not perfect. There's no fraud prevention. There's only fraud mitigation, right? So, I think working together is the best mitigant that you can have with your third parties in avoiding fraud. Okay. Want to go to the next slide?
Next slide. Yeah.
Okay. So when you're working with your financial institution on this, I mentioned all the parties working together. Some of the things that we do in helping mitigate fraud, and sometimes customers say, well, why do you have to call me back on a wire? I initiated the wire, and but it's everything that we do is for the protection of all parties involved, to make sure we're handling your money correctly, that we're doing our best to reduce the amount of fraud that's introduced into the payment systems, whether it's ACH or wire, check fraud, et cetera, card fraud. So we've put a lot of tools in place as an industry to help with that mitigation process. One of the first ones that we talk about is wire callbacks. Mentioned before, right? Wires are irrevocable, so it's very, very critical that we authenticate that the wire that you're initiating is the wire that you intend to initiate. Sometimes that can be difficult if you got that business email compromise and the fake email saying send to this because you think you're initiating the right wire. That's why we encourage education on your side, as well as extra care on all sides to make sure that that transaction is correct. We use some anomaly detection too. If we see something that goes outside of what the norm has been for your activity, that can raise a flag to us and help prevent any transactions going out the door that shouldn't. Sometimes, most of the time, I would say, it's meant as a legitimate transaction. But the fact that we can help you in that, it makes everything more secure. And then one of the most common and older forms of security that we offer customers is positive pay, whether it's check positive pay, ACH positive pay, a debit block. And check positive pay has become more sophisticated over the years, where you can do positive pay down to the payee level. So that takes some of the old check washing out of the equation, because you used to, if you've ever read Frank Abagnale's books, he would wash the checks and put his name on a check that was written to somebody else, and nobody would know the difference until further down the road. But with payee positive pay, if somebody tries to do that, it can be caught up front before the check is posted against the account. And then reverse positive pay is just reviewing on a proactive basis, the customer reviewing every check that's posting against their account to make sure it's what they issued. So there are a lot of great tools out there, and if companies aren't using those tools, they're really, it's not a matter of if, it's more of a matter of when will the fraud occur against the account. We can set up dual and triple controls on payments initiation. It's rare anymore that somebody just lets an ACH file be originated without some type of a dual control, or a wire transfer without a dual control or a callback. Obviously, the secure browsers are utilized, multi-factor authentication, token authentication. All of those are ways that the bank is trying to help our customers mitigate the risk of fraud and any nefarious activity against their accounts. And I think those have been pretty successful. But Anthony, from your perspective as a user of some of these tools, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, everything that keeps popping in my head, and what we tell our employees is just communicate, right? It's really about just being a little patient, right? And sometimes, our clients get frustrated with us, and their clients are getting frustrated at them. But at the end of the day, the fraudsters are only getting more savvy and more sophisticated, right? So if I'm speaking with Michael, if I'm speaking with you, Beth, we're all sharing, sort of ideas and just scenarios that have happened to us in the past. So we're always trying to stay on top of it, but they're always, these fraudsters are always getting better. So the only thing that really comes to mind is just really continuing to communicating with your partners, communicating with your investors, with their investors, our clients and their investors, just constant communication. I think that's really how we're gonna continue to stay on top of this stuff.
Yeah, and if I can throw one more thing in there, Anthony.
Yeah.
I totally agree that the communication, and I alluded to this before, but communication and timely communication is key. The sooner every party knows and can start acting on a potential fraud situation, the better the chance of recovery of funds. Banks do have some timelines, whether it's a check return, ACH return, or trying to revoke a wire. So we need to work within those timelines. So the sooner we're notified, the better the chance of recovery.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Really good summary. I had one last comment to this to kind of tie a bow on it. Yes, next slide, please. On the majority of the forensic investigations we do related to wire fraud, we find that our clients have confirmed with the bank. The bank, I'm always impressed. The bank has got the greatest defenses in the world, and they've got super sophisticated ways to do multi-factor authentication. And we're dealing with people who confirmed the fraudulent instructions. So a key takeaway here for those of you listening that deal with controls is don't assume because you're using a key fob that automatically the information you're confirming is correct. And that's why the whole chain from that wire, from receiving an email with instructions to then confirming the bank, is critical to look and verify throughout the entire chain. And that's a real good segue here to say, look, the convergence we talked about between the operational controls and the common sense controls and the technical controls come together here on the technical side. So very, very briefly, we have a handout that we'll provide to anybody, if you'd like, that talks about 7 key IT security controls that management should be asking of their IT team. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go in detail here, and the idea isn't that our listeners should somehow become IT directors. That's not it at all. But as an executive there are 7 things that I would consider to be critical to Pareto to be your first line of defense to prevent email breaches, which therefore are often the root cause to those security breaches. And it starts with these 7 things here. I won't go through it, but keep in mind that they're summarized and wrapped in a bow with phishing training and training on cybersecurity. 2 different things. Just keep in mind that training is probably your ultimate best defense, and it needs to be done often. Next slide. So, guys, as we come to the bottom line here, what I'd like to do is just basically say, and hopefully this comes across, it's generally not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. Regardless of the protections we take, the bad guys are almost always going to be ahead of us when it comes to breaching our technical controls, and I suspect they're always going to be ahead of us when it comes to breaching our operational controls. Beth, any last thoughts here as we close up?
No, I think you captured it really well. I think we talked about a lot of this stuff already, and I think we've said many times, trust but verify, and education is the key. And education, proactiveness, and timeliness are 3 of the keys in avoiding fraud and making sure that you're running a tight organization. Work with your financial institution and work with your business partners. Anthony, anything from your side?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you both. I mean, we kind of hammered it home. I would say educate and communicate, right? And just make sure that just be vigilant, right? I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. So, but I'm sure we have some questions that people are interested in learning a little bit more. So maybe we should jump to that.
Good idea.
Terrific. Kevra, do we have time for questions?
Yep, I think we'll need to talk quickly, but we do have just a few. So, Michael, the first one I think would be best for you. Someone's saying that they're not necessarily technical, but they want to understand the need for additional wire procedures to double check for fake wires. So the person's asking, should my IT vendor have all the technical stuff covered on my behalf?
Wow. Yeah. Almost every client we work with thinks that their IT staff understands security. And I'm not knocking IT, whether it's internal or a managed service provider. But we have found over and over, when we talk about trust and verify, the worst offenders or the organizations that just aren't competent in security are the ones who are excessively competent in IT ops. And they're different skill sets. No harm or foul against the IT team, but generally, the idea that helps them to help you with IT, the better and easier IT is, probably the less secure it is. So absolutely, that's a fallacy, and you should be asking those 7 questions that we've provided here, and also look for an external entity to always review your IT security hygiene.
Perfect. Anthony, this one is for you. I don't understand how an investor could have their wire misdirected if it's our email that is breached. If we already do verbal calls on all wires we send, why would we want our investors to call us?
Yeah, I mean, it's good question. Basically, criminals can be communicating with the managers, investors, without the managers even knowing it, right? It's very easy, as Michael had mentioned, within the 7 questions. They can be setting up written rules in the background of your Outlook, and you as a money manager would have no idea, and they would be sending emails out to your clients. So you can have an investor that's being emailed from your email address, and you'll have no idea, because they'll be deleting the emails, the sent emails, and then they'll be sending an email to an investor looking for a subscription, a capital call, and then next thing you know, there could be a wire. You bank with Tri-State, but there could be a wire going to another legitimate bank like Bank of America, and then next thing you know, the wires are in B of A to JP Morgan Chase, and then out of the country. So we only know what they're doing now because everyone on the phone has actually seen it. things, as I mentioned before, things are going to change. We need to stay on top of how these fraudsters, how these criminals are adapting, because they are becoming more sophisticated. So again, it's really about communicating and just making sure that you're educating your investors, right? So, if you think about it, you have some investors are older people that are not so super tech savvy. So when it comes to emailing and wiring money via online portals, just take the extra step to give them a little bit more comfort, because those are the most vulnerable.
Thanks, Anthony. Beth, this last one is for you. What are some extra steps the bank can take to help in managing fraud and protecting customers?
Well, I think that some of the easy things that the bank can do, maybe not easy, but the things that we can do that help. I mentioned anomaly detection before, and I think more and more banks are doing that, where we look at patterns of the business that our customers transact. If something falls outside of those patterns, we should notify the customer as a trusted partner to make sure that it's the business that they want to transact and it's not something that's fraudulent that has happened. Another thing that we do just quickly, and again, more banks are doing this, is doing better research on the customers, the depositors, and the companies that we bank and who are customers of our customers, through negative news and making sure that they're legitimate businesses. So between doing research on the companies and the anomaly detection, I think that's making great strides as far as risk mitigation for our customers.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks to everyone for attending today. A reminder that we will be sending the recording via email, and all the materials will be available online. So thanks for your time, and have a great day.